Okay, guys. Well, the 3 minutes is over, so we're gonna go ahead and get started. Thanks for coming. Um, I can't promise you that this is gonna be the last time I'm gonna remind you about this because I feel like it's really important. Tomorrow's session is the one session I want you all to come to. And I can't drag you there, but if I could, I totally would. It's called Interrupting Racism. It's by Child Advocates. I think it's going to be phenomenal, and the timing is a little different. It's from 10 to noon. So, yeah, that's what I got. Without further ado, Mr. Mark Nottingham talking about focus.
Thanks, Rosie. I'll just affirm what Rosie said and say that if you, in your mind, can only attend this session today or the session tomorrow, then go ahead and hang up. Hopefully what I'm going to say is valuable. I think tomorrow's will be really, really good and worth your time. So hopefully y'all can make it to that. So today we're going to talk about focus. And I just want to start out by saying it might sound like I think I know what I'm talking about or that I think I'm really good at this. I would describe myself as someone who has realized the value of focus and is still trying to grow in my ability to do it. So in some ways I'm good at it, in some ways I have a long way to go. So I'm just going to share some thoughts and resources that I have found helpful. I'm going to talk about 2 books that I think are really helpful and highlight a couple things from those. One of them particularly designed for realtors. We're going to do a thought exercise in just helping you think through where your focus is currently going, and then hopefully leave you with an application that you're going to kind of have to put your like turn your mind on a bit at the end to create your own application. So that's the goal. I took a look. The Webster's dictionary has something like 12 different definitions for the word focus. The one that I thought was the most applicable to what we're talking about today is to concentrate attention or effort. So not a very complex word. I think we all know what the word means. What my goal is for you to think about the word focus as saying no to good things in order to give your highest value to better things. So I'm going to say that again. My hypothesis or thesis is that focus is saying no to good things in order to give your highest value to better things. Okay. I'll come back to why that's my working definition of the word focus. So I want to start by talking about 2 books that one of which has had a big impact on me, one of which I think has had some impact on me, and they're both very helpful on this topic. The first is The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey. Raise your hand or jump into the chat if you've read that book. I'm kind of curious. I'm certain that at least several of you had. Chris, I see that you have. I love Michelle's reaction there. What I got from Michelle is that she took a look at the outline and skimmed a couple chapters. Does that sound about right, Michelle?
I feel like I read most of it.
Okay, fair enough. So Michelle got 4 habits from it, which is not bad, really. I mean, if you came away with 4. So this book, I mean, it's been read by millions. Look, it can be pretty cheesy. Any book that has a number in the title, let's just be honest and say it's probably cheesy. It probably oversimplifies some things. But here's the reality. It's been an incredibly influential book in a lot of successful people's lives. So it's got really good content. And I'm going to focus in this morning on the first 3 of the 7 habits. And I would just encourage you, perhaps something that I say kind of tips the scales and you choose to engage with that book, it is worth your time. It's available on audio. There are now like a bunch of different versions out there of the book, like 7 Habits for fill in the blank. The original stock version, it's not long. It's really good. It's worth your time. Okay. So read it or listen to it. The first 3 habits of the book. Number 1, be proactive. Number 2, start with the end in mind. And number 3, put first things first. Okay, be proactive, start with the end in mind, and put first things first. You could probably already tell why in a session on focus am I highlighting the 7 habits of highly effective people. It's because the first 3 of the 7 habits are all centered in this idea of how are you spending your mental energy and time. And here is, so I'm gonna set up kind of the opposite, or the, I think the math term would be the foil of the first 3 habits. What I know my human default is, so let's just embrace this for a second. If I just act according to my kind of basic human instinct, I am much more likely to be reactive. So I'm going to end up being at the mercy of my email inbox or my voicemail most of my day. If I don't intentionally try to change this, most of my day is going to end up in a space where I am reacting to something, right? My mental, my emotional energies, my time is going to be spent responding or reacting to things. Okay. So the first habit of a highly effective person is to be proactive. And I think human instinct is to be reactive. I know that's true of me, and I have certainly observed that to be true in our industry. The second one there, the start with the end in mind. I think, again, it's human default, and I see this a lot, to only keep the present front and center in your mind. So one way to say this is that as human beings, we tend to do the things that will affect today, and we put off or ignore the things that will affect tomorrow. Right? You can even see this in like little microcosms, right? Our physical activity habits, our eating habits. But I'm really talking more about in a professional setting. Where are we investing our best resources? Well, if we're not really intentional or strategic about it, and we just kind of use a default mode of operation, the norm is that our best resources go to things that affect the here and now, the present, today. So the second habit of a highly effective person is that they start with the end in mind. If you start with the end in mind, your best energy, your first energy, your best focus is going to be spent on things that are aiming at the end. Okay? Third habit of a highly effective person is to put first things first. So essentially that means correctly prioritizing. That could be correctly prioritizing your day, correctly prioritizing your values, your time, where your, again, mental and emotional energy goes, that you are appropriately ranking where your limited resources are going based upon a very intentional list. The only way that you could put first things first are to know what the first things are. You can't correctly prioritize if you haven't thought about what is the highest priority. And again, I think human default is not to put the first things first. It's not to prioritize, to align our energy and resources with our highest priorities. What's the human default? And I see this in real estate all the time. Our human capacities and energies and resources go to whatever is immediately in front of our face. And it doesn't really matter where it falls in the priority list. It could be the 8th most important thing of the 12 things we do. But if I put the 8th most important thing, I'll pick on Chris Glassburn. Chris, because you said you've read the book. So sorry. If Chris makes a list of 12 priorities, and I know what the 8th priority is, if I keep putting that thing in front of her face, probably not literally, but maybe literally, most human beings will just end up dedicating the best parts of themselves to that thing because it's in their face, regardless of the fact that it was 8th on their list of 12 priorities, right? And so I think to be effective at focus, I think you have to acknowledge that these, all 7 of the habits in Covey's book, but for this conversation, these 3 are the most applicable, that all 3 of these are not natural defaults. Some of you are going to naturally be better at them than others. I actually, I'm pretty good at one of those 3. I'm not very good at 2 of those 3 naturally. I have to work very hard to be good at the other 2. And that's probably true of some of you, right? My point there is that I think you start with the acknowledgement that true effective focus isn't the norm. It's not the default mode. It requires intentionality and strategy. That's one of the themes in the book. Habits have to be formed, right? They whether they're intentionally formed or unintentionally formed, they have to be built. They have to be formed for them to work. And so starting with that realization that much of what we see in ourselves and in other people is the opposite of those 3 habits. And that, so going back to this kind of working definition that I'm proposing for the word focus, saying no to the good things in order to give your highest value to the better things. I think those 3 habits really get at the ability to say no in all different forms. Sometimes saying no means like literally saying no. Someone asks you to do something and you say no. I think a lot of times though, saying no is just a matter of being proactive with your schedule, right? Like it's very intentionally avoiding the opportunity to potentially be, distracted by something. So there's all sorts of ways in which we say no. We're going to come back to this thought exercise of like, what does it mean to say no to good things? What's that half of that working definition mean? But this is why the 7 habits is, I think, such a great resource, is that it helps to rewire or reorient what your natural tendency is to becoming more effective. And 3 out of the 7 really do have to do with focus. Okay, I'm going to hit pause. I'm about to go to a second book written by a real estate industry person. There's also a podcast about this. But before I do that, thoughts on the 7 habits of highly effective people, or those first 3 habits, the be proactive, start with the end in mind, and put first things first. Anything come to mind, or anybody want to ask a question? It's only 9:15 a.m. and we're talking about philosophical, like deep human condition type things. So maybe you're not with me yet. Michelle's with me. Thanks, Michelle. I appreciate you. But yeah, thoughts or questions on those habits in particular. Maybe somebody could share their own challenge with that, or like where they've seen growth in their own life in being able to kind of take those things under their own control as habits. So I'm muting myself for a moment. Yeah, Chris, that book has been on my it's actually been on my nightstand in my room for, I don't know, 6 months, and I haven't even opened it yet, which is hilarious when you think about it. Rosie, I think, recommended that book. Was it you? No, someone here did. It was maybe somebody on my team. Start with the why. Okay, I'm gonna keep going. It's one of the reasons why Zoom is no fun. I can't make obvious eye contact with one of you to try to get you to share. It doesn't work in Zoom. If we were all in the room, that's totally what would be happening right now. So shifting gears to a second resource that I have found helpful. So actually earlier this year, we recommended a book by Gary Keller called Shift that Gary Keller wrote in kind of in the middle of the Great Recession as the real estate market shifted in 09 and 10. He's also written another book that I recommend to a lot of people, The Millionaire Real Estate Agent. I think both of those are good books. I'm actually going to recommend a third Gary Keller book, which is called The One Thing. The premise of this book, The One Thing, is and so this is right off the book jacket. I didn't make this up because it sounds cheesy, y'all, but just bear with me. The surprisingly simple truth behind extraordinary results. The book discusses the value of simplifying one's workload by focusing on the one most important task in any given project. So Keller co-wrote this book with somebody who I think is kind of in mental coach training, so like kind of personal development in terms of the capacity of professionals. And it's similar to 7 Habits, and it has some cheesy stuff, but I really think it's a great resource. Particularly, it's written, by someone from our industry, and I think we're in an industry that this is the blessing and curse of what we do. How many things could you focus on in a given day? So if the title of the book is The One Thing, and the premise is increasing the effectiveness of results by focusing on the one most important thing. We're in an industry where there is an extraordinarily high number of things that we could be focused on. Let's think about that for a second, particularly for those that are realtors. Y'all realize our line of work touches every point of a fairly complex transaction. You see that? Right? There are lots of vocations where a particular role plays a very specific part of a larger process, right? You can think about, if you want to use the illustration of a factory, a lot of vocations, an illustration of a factory where something's being made and it stops by 20 different parts, 20 different stops. Well, most vocations are sitting at 1 or 2 of those 20 stops. And so in the development of the product, you are able to become very, very good at the one thing that you do. As a realtor, y'all see that that's very challenging because you're the business development person, you're the marketing person, you're the HR person, you're the customer service person, you're the salesperson, you're the operations person, you're the administration person, you're the coordinator, right? Now, some of you are on teams where that maybe changes a little bit, but the kind of typical model in our industry is anything but the one thing. Just by nature, our jobs require us to be proficient in hundreds of different things. The example came to mind. I had a teammate that was asking for feedback yesterday during our team meeting. Y'all have had similar examples of this, but she has a client who has a house listed for sale, who's experiencing some pretty significant anxiety. I think both just kind of like normal anxiety about the house not selling. I think probably very potentially like diagnosed anxiety, right? And the client has been communicating with their agent at a frequency and pace and intensity that is very challenging for the agent to figure out, like, how do I service this business really well in light of the way in which the client is communicating with me. And there's really there's no out for the agent there, right? Like, oftentimes, we've joked about this as realtors. A lot of times we're playing the role of counselor, whether we want to or not, whether we're qualified to do that or not. We do end up playing that role because we don't have this really specific focus in the middle of a transaction. We are start to finish. And so I think this book is, and it's also available on audio. I think it's really helpful in cutting through some of the, again, human defaults and assumptions that we make. We think we don't have the ability to focus because there are so many things we have to pay attention to. So because there's a really long list of things that we have to do, we interpret that as being the same as not being able to give our best focus to the one thing that's critical. Y'all follow me on that? I'm gonna say that again. Because we have 100 different tasks that we do. I actually think you could literally make a list of 100 different things a realtor does. Because the list is so long, we probably passively assume that that means we can't dedicate much energy to the one most critical, vital thing. I don't believe that's true. What I believe is, I think the length of the list of things we have to do makes it very difficult to focus on the one thing. And I found that book to be a good resource in kind of challenging some of those presumptions, right? Or some of those defaults. So one thing that you're gonna find there is that human beings tend to let other people put expectations on them and to not realize that those expectations are coming from elsewhere and probably aren't vital. That these expectations get created in terms of how you spend time and energy without you thinking about it. So you're not questioning, why do I think I need to spend time doing this? Right? You do it. And so the book kind of cuts through that and I think encourages the questioning of those expectations. Because that has to happen in order to be able to focus on the one thing. If you're a self-aware person and you're thinking, okay, great, Mark just recommended 2 books and that ain't gonna happen. I'm not gonna read or listen to either of those books. I respect the self-awareness. I might push you a little bit and say, I know you can read, let's do it. But if you know that's true, there is a podcast. The Tim Ferriss has a podcast, Ferris, where he interviews like entrepreneurs, nonprofit business leaders. There's a particular episode where he interviews Gary Keller about the one thing. So if you're like, you know what, I'll listen to a 50-minute podcast, I'm not going to read a book, then listen to the podcast. You'll get a lot of the, I think, good content, and hopefully you'll find that helpful. Okay. If nothing else comes of this and you engage in one of those two resources, I believe that you will find that very helpful in your career as a realtor. Um, I have revisited the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People 3 times in the last 15 years. I read it, I engage it, I kind of get that like high. I'm like, oh yeah, I need to, here's where I need to get better. I'll come back to it 5 years later, and if I'm honest, I'm gonna say, oh boy, I probably did okay at that habit for about 2 years. So this is not something that you arrive at the ability to focus by using these habits, or with the Gary Keller book, by prioritizing the one thing. You never arrive at doing it. You're going to go through seasons and you're going to get better, but there's always room to say no to more good things in order to give your highest value to better things. Okay. I'm going to shift gears, and we're all going to do a thought exercise together. I will pause for a moment and say thoughts on the Stephen Covey book or the Gary Keller book. Have any of you read The One Thing? I'd be a little bit more surprised if any of you. It's certainly not nearly as broadly read or talked about as the 7 Habits.
I've read it.
Ah, yes, the former Keller Williams agent on the call.
Yes.
You know what? He's put a lot of good content out. He really has. Hey, yeah, Megan, you're exactly right. It's like start with why. It's been on my nightstand for 6 months. That means I'm getting like half of the information from it, right? It's totally true. We can all identify. Well, I would really encourage you to engage with those two resources, and I'd love to hear, like, after you do that, like, how did it impact you? What did you find helpful from those? Okay, I'm gonna shift gears here, and I'm gonna ask all of you to do a thought exercise that, boy, would I love to be in the same room, because I think there's impact there, but this will work just as well, I hope, on Zoom. But it's going to require you to kind of intentionally like calm your mind for a moment, try to free yourself of distractions, turn your phone over, close your Gmail, whatever that is. Okay. I feel like we should say namaste here in a second, but we're just going to, thank you. Yep. I knew several of you would follow me on that. What I'm going to ask you to do, I'm going to ask you to visualize yourself going through a typical workday. Okay. So how do you spend the day? Where are you? What gets your energy at the start of the day? I've got more questions coming, but I'm going to ask those again. How do you spend the day? Where are you? What's getting your very first bit of human energy? Okay, keep going through the day. So mentally just keep going through the day. How do you feel? What are you spending the most time doing? What are you accomplishing? What are you checking off the list? Okay, as you keep going through the day, how structured is it? So another way of asking how structured, how much of what you do in the day was decided before the day started? So you're visualizing, where am I? What am I doing? How many of those things were decided before you started? So I threw a lot of questions. You don't have to answer all those questions. I just think they can be helpful for you to kind of go through the day. And maybe you go through the day in terms of your to-do list. Maybe you're going through the day in terms of like, well, here's what I did between 9 and 10, and here's what I did between 1 and 2. And so mentally go through your day, and I'm going to give you like a couple minutes to keep visualizing this. And I'm going to ask you to write a couple thoughts down. So how did you spend it? Where were you? What did you do first? What got most of your time? What did you accomplish? How structured was it? You can let any of those kind of take your mind wherever it goes. Okay. I'm going to give you 2 minutes, 120 seconds of silence. Go. Your 2 minutes is up. If you're like me, you find it very difficult for your surroundings to be silent for 2 minutes. Yes, Chris, I think that says something about us, by the way. I don't know what, probably not great. I think this is an exercise that we could probably do a lot of times and get good productivity from it. Visualizing your workday, it could bring up something that's super significant that has nothing to do with how you focus. So I think there's all sorts of reasons that this is a good thing to do. But what I want to come from this, I want you to try to write down 2 things. I want to know what you did first, and I want to know what you did the most. Okay? What did you do first, and what did you do the most?
Mark, this is just like what did we do first during our work day, right? Not like first thing when we wake up, just our work day.
Good question. Yes. Yeah, workday. Yeah, as you visualize your workday, what type of activity got your first attention? And then what did you do the most? So write those down. Yeah, I'm gonna share my answers, and I'm gonna ask a couple of you to share just to give, some examples floating out there. They're all gonna be different. On most days, the very first work-related thing that I do, I have an automated BLC search email that hits my phone at probably 6:30 a.m. Usually the first work engaged thing that I do is within probably 10 minutes of being awake. I look through new or appended listings in a particular geography to see if something jumps out at me.
Mark, what's the geography?
Huh?
What's the geography? What are your limits? Is it in here in Morton?
It's Old North Side, Heron Morton, Fall Creek Place, and the Near East Side. I'm in no way advocating, by the way, I know I got to prescribe my answer for that because I've been thinking about it. I'm not saying this is like a good first thing to do, by the way. It's just on most days, that's the first work-related thing that I do. For me, the thing that I do the most is talk to people. The majority of my day is either spent in a meeting, at a meal, on the phone, talking with someone. The vast majority of my day. I'm going to come back to that because it didn't used to be the case for me. Okay, a few of you, I would love to know what's the first work-related thing you saw yourself doing. We'll start with that one. Give me 3 examples. What's the first work-related thing you saw yourself doing?
Do you want me to call on someone from the list? Because we can totally do that.
I don't know, something about Zoom makes me feel bad doing that.
Oh, I have no shame.
Yeah. Checking emails, I think, is probably going to be high up there. That's essentially what my first thing is. I just know there's that one email that usually is the first one I engage with. So we essentially have 3 votes for checking and responding to emails and text messages. Mark is checking an auto search. While mine's not set up for a particular client, I think pretty similar. Okay. Oh, Chris. Chris gets a gold star for the only answer that has been proposed for the first thing of the day that could be defined as proactive, right? She's very intentionally deciding her first work activity is an intentional decision about what to do in the day. Everyone else's answers, mine included, is like the definition of reactive. What was at the top of my inbox? Not suggesting that we can avoid that. I'm just saying that's reactive. Good stuff. Okay, second question. What did you end up spending the most time doing? So how did you categorize that? What got the most of your time? Give me at least 3 examples. Mark says procrastinating. There had to be something, some content to the procrastination, right? Like, were you checking Facebook? Is that how you procrastinate? Or were you like doing laundry or?
Yes, all of the above.
Okay.
Facebook, laundry,
Okay.
loading the dishwasher, anything but what I should be doing.
Okay. Rosie's is similar to mine. Pretty centered around human interaction, meetings, good. Did anybody's answer on that one essentially amount to sitting in front of a computer? I'm just really curious about like the way in which we all spend time. I think we're going to see a wide variety on that. Yeah, Angelica said interacting with and messaging people. Okay. Thought exercise is taking a turn here. I'm going to ask another question. You're going to have to write down your answers. So right now, you have written down, what did you visualize yourself doing first for work? And what did you visualize yourself doing the most of for work? Okay. The next question is, what is the one most important thing that you spend time on in your line of work? The thing that you absolutely have to have, you have to do to survive. And I get it. You're going to say, well, that's really hard to answer, Mark, because of what I'm talking about earlier about the 100 to-do lists or 100 items on your to-do list. I know it's a hard question, but you got to come up with an answer and write it down. What is the one thing that you as a realtor have to do to succeed? One of the many reasons I love this group of people. The theme here in your answers, it's very clear and it's great. I'm just going to read a couple of them out loud. I'm guessing those of you that wrote down answers that haven't commented here maybe have something similar. Prospecting, maintaining and building relationships, interacting with the community, interviews, having conversations with people, engage, be present and intentional in people's lives. Y'all see the theme, right? The very clear picture of what it is that is vital for us to succeed. That's not going to look the same for all of you. It doesn't mean there's this catch-all one like specific most important thing for every person to succeed. I do believe there are some themes there in terms of what leads to success. Most of those are not reactive, right? The most vital things in our industry tend to require proactivity. I love Minna. I really appreciate Minna's honesty here. In the what did you spend the most time doing? Minna essentially said, I spent the most time planning to prospect, which is really great. So it's like you are acknowledging the importance, but still admitting the challenge, which is great. So here's the application part of this. You all have written down what you visualize yourself doing first, what you visualize yourself doing the most, and what you believe is absolutely vital to your success. So the application is, how do those answers compare? How do they overlap or not? And there isn't a hard science to this. This is a subjective exercise, but this is a really good self-reflection tool to say, when I visualize my input into work, what gets my first energy and most of my energy? And then how would I rate myself in the comparison of those two things to what I'm saying is the most important, the one vital thing? And here's where this falls on a spectrum. None of you are at a 0 and none of you are at 100. Like, both of those are myths. To some degree, you are correctly focusing your time and energy on the right things. And to some degree, you are not. So you're all doing this somehow, but you all have room to grow. And what I want you to leave with in the next 10 minutes, in light of what you visualized in your workday, and in light of what you're saying is the most important, I'm going to ask everybody to come up with one thing that they spend too much time doing, one thing that they spend not enough time doing. And I'm going to ask you to come up with how to change that. Okay, so that's how we're going to finish this. But first, don't think about the second and the third. Think about what's something that, if I'm honest, I take a hard look at my priorities, what I believe is vital, and how I'm spending my time. One thing that I spend too much time doing. If you can't come up with an answer to that question, I don't believe you. You can all come up with something you spend too much time doing. One thing you spend too much time doing. Write it down. Okay, hopefully you have all written something down that you spend too much time doing. Second question, what's the one thing you don't spend enough time? I know they're hard questions. Write down one thing you don't spend enough time doing. So the final application is looking at those two things. Write down one way that you could positively affect both of those. So how do you change it? So don't think about the silver bullet solution. This isn't a how do I get to 100% performance? That's a myth. What's one way that I could change the trajectory of how I'm spending my time? One thing that I could realistically do to spend a bit less time on the thing I'm spending too much time on. So my answer number one, how do I spend less time there and a bit more time on my answer to number two? What's the way in which I can change that behavior? So I'm going to give you a couple examples here. So you don't have to write down your answer yet to kind of jog your thinking. Just in my own experience, these are some things I found helpful, or just in terms of like the science behind this as human beings. One example, where do you work? The physical space. My hunch is that if some of you intentionally worked some of your week at a different place, you would more easily allow your mind to do different things. That could be applied in a lot of different ways. That could be more at home, less at home, more in an office, less in an office, more in a coffee shop. Maybe it could be you need to kind of mesh this with time blocking and say, I'm going to work for 4 hours a week in a little bit more remote location. And when I'm there, I'm not going to have my phone. But like tying it to the physical place that you work is one example. Time blocking. Some of you here at this brokerage are really good at time blocking. I waver on this one. I'm only okay at time blocking. Time blocking could mean, okay, I'm going to schedule an appointment with myself between 10 and 11:30 every single day, and I'm not going to compromise on it. Maybe that's realistic for you, right? On a schedule an appointment with myself to do X. So physical space, where am I? Time blocking, how am I running my calendar? Perhaps it's a personal development thing where you're going to get a coach, some form of like partner to try to hold you accountable to some of these things. You're going to commit to reading certain books or going through a training program. I have done some of that. I in that category, I tend to like, most of my mentors are authors, if y'all know what I mean by that, but maybe that doesn't work for you. Maybe it's, I need a coach. I know enough about myself. I'll meet with a coach once a week for an hour. I'm never going to read a Gary Keller book. So physical place, time blocking, committing to a personal development strategy, coaching, accountability, reading. Perhaps it's something to do with technology. Say, I just learned that one of my teammates doesn't keep her phone in the room that she sleeps in. And I don't know, y'all, this just says something probably unhealthy about me. That blew my mind. She very intentionally doesn't keep her phone anywhere near her so that when she wakes up, she actually has to kind of be intentional to get to a piece of technology. There's a boundary thing there, but it got me thinking about that. Honestly, it did. Like, could that help me be more me personally be more intentional about the like early energy of my day instead of allowing it to be reactive? So it could be something about technology. Social media. Mark, I appreciate your authenticity. I did kind of call you out by saying, is it on Facebook? maybe you're going to say, you know what? I got to take Facebook off my phone. Angelica is one of several agents here who is an absolute pro at utilizing social media effectively for her business. Probably a bad idea for her to take it off of her phone, but I bet one of you could admit that social media on your phone is the thing that causes you to burn time. So it could be something with social media. Just throwing out some examples there, like coming up with the one thing in light of what you're saying you spend too much time doing and not enough time doing. What's one thing that you can implement that provides positive change to those two things? Guys, I really appreciate you hearing me out and going through what can feel like, I know for some of you, the thought exercise of visualizing your workday is like out of your comfort zone. So I appreciate you like indulging me in that. I hope you can latch on to some one thing that you've realized, wow, it's really important for me to focus on this, and I'm not doing it. It isn't getting the best of me because of where and how I'm working. And so I think to think about focus as something that you decide to do in the moment it's like it's a myth, right? Like you don't focus isn't the ability to show up at your desk and in that moment avoid distractions. Some of you are better at that than others. I think focus is a result of things that you're doing way before, things that you're thinking about, things that you're being intentional or strategic about way before you sat down at the desk. So that's why I think the thought exercise, the philosophical, the books, like engaging in those resources, recalibrating your defaults in all of those ways will help you so that in the moment, you're not having to kind of beat yourself up like, oh my goodness, focus. By the time you're sitting there at the desk, your conditions are already wired and you're just going to do what you're going to do. That's my take on our ability to change ourselves has to happen way before that. So hopefully there's something you can latch onto, just kind of an honest self-reflection in how you're doing. I learn about this from quite a few of you. I think many of you are very good at saying no to good things. I think this is one of the results, is that you have learned to be able to remove the possibility of saying yes to something that is good and reasonable. So you've removed the possibility of saying yes to that in order to increase the number of times you're saying yes to the better use of your time and energy. That's going to look different for all of us. I don't think it's a one size fits all. Okay, it's 10:02. Rosie's going to cut me off. I'm finished anyway. I'd love it if any of you ever do engage in 7 Habits of Highly Effective People or the one thing from Gary Keller. I would love to buy you lunch someday to hear about. I'll order a cluster truck and send it to your house and we can do a Zoom call if you want to do it that way too right now. But I'd love to hear your experience in those two things, and because I think I would learn from it too. So thanks for engaging. Final plug tomorrow. Like Rosie said, we really would love to have many of you there. I think it will be a great use of your time.
Yeah, I'm not going to beat a dead horse. Mark just said what I wanted to say. So thanks for coming. Join us tomorrow from 10 to 12. Have a good one.